So what we're going to do is we're here to expose it, let people tell their story, and let everybody in the public see the horrors of the court system in Suffolk County, New York.
Long Island Backstory with Chief Correspondent Gary Jacobs.
Good afternoon, I'm Gary Jacobs, and welcome to another edition of Long Island Backstory, where we film at the Cablevision Studios in Hop Hog, New York. This afternoon, I'm honored to have my friend Robert Hiltzik, an attorney from Nassau County, who actually I've been asking to come on the show for almost 2 years. Maybe one of the questions is what finally made him decide to agree to come on the show, but I have been asking him to come on because he has so much knowledge. I wanted to share it. Robert is what we call, a lot of people have like their family doctor. Well, we have our family lawyer. So Robert is my family lawyer, and unfortunately, he's had to represent a lot of people in my family. And I like to say that he's the best second lawyer anybody can have, which I'm going to explain a little bit more as we get into the show. One of the things I like about Robert Hiltzik is that he thinks outside of the box. He could be a pit bull when it's needed, but he's a skilled negotiator and litigator, which is something that's very important in attorneys. Many attorneys just have a loud mouth, but when it comes to litigating, they don't know what they're doing, and you're at a disadvantage because honestly, in this world, people know which attorneys can't litigate, and that makes it hard for you to settle. But if you're going up against an attorney that they say, this guy is a good litigator, and he will take it to trial, he's not afraid to, I think it makes settling easier. Many attorneys are either a pit bull, they're a litigator, they're just a nice guy, but one of the things I like about Robert is he can do either one of those things at the right time. One of the other reasons I feel Mr. Hiltzik is such a successful lawyer is that, as he says, he likes to manage his clients, and we'll ask him about this. But this is one of the most important things in a divorce case, because once you do one wrong thing, and I know this from personal experience, it gets magnified, and this ends up becoming all you talk about. So something that's a little detail really needs to be managed from the beginning of your case right through the end of your case. A little bit of background on Robert Hiltzik. He was admitted to practice law before the courts of the state of New York in 1993. Through most of his legal career, he's been a sole practitioner. From November 2005 through March of 2009, he was a member of the Manhattan firm Raoul Felder, who's one of the famed lawyers in New York City. I think he did Giuliani, Princess Di met with him. I think he actually did Donald Trump, didn't he?
Possibly.
I think he did Donald Trump.
Not while I was there.
Okay, and actually that's where I met Robert, was when I retained Raoul Felder, and Robert ended up handling my case. So that was a real blessing, and that's how I became hooked up with him. His specialty was matrimonial and family court litigation. As a sole practitioner, his practice has been involved in litigating such sophisticated issues and matters as those concerning antitrust, RICO, federal employment litigation, federal trademark matters. Mr. Hiltzik has substantial trial experience in both New York State courts and federal courts. He's fully conversant with the nature, quality, and quantity of the legal services necessary to properly prosecute an action for divorce and litigate matters of this type. So Robert, finally welcome to the show. First question, family law sucks, right? It's a difficult thing. People say it's like the worst thing. What made you specialize in family law?
Well, you know what, when you're a sole practitioner, people come in and, a lot of people have family problems, they have matrimonial problems, and they come in, you start doing it. It is the most miserable area of law because you have all the elements of all types of litigation, except now you have the addition of the emotional baggage, and you really have to manage that, and that's one of the most difficult parts of the practice, is managing that emotional level.
Right. So why are you different? And I said a lot of it at the beginning, but what makes you different than a lot of these other matrimonial attorneys that you see all over Facebook doing advertising and big signs everywhere? What makes you different than them? Well, I know that's a long question. It's sort of open-ended, but
well, listen, I don't know what whether you call it a difference or not, but our approach to the case is different in that, my firm, we're litigation specialists. So in litigation, whether it's a commercial issue, a personal injury issue, you have to put everything together. You have to put your proofs together. The evidence is very important. And we approach the divorce like any other type of litigation, we collect all our proofs, and we make sure that we're running down all the issues so that everything is covered. And we'd like to do it relatively aggressively, get all the discovery out, do depositions, and see if we can find something that maybe somebody's overlooking. We're very conversant in evaluating tax returns, business records, financials, because we do that in other parts of our practice as well.
So when you always say, I like to manage my clients, tell me what you mean by manage your clients, because a lot of times people go in, they leave the deposit and the retainer, and you don't hear from your lawyer. And I know this from personal experience, because you weren't my first lawyer. I think you were my third or fourth lawyer, and it was very frustrating to me. First of all, it's my life that I'm dealing with, and I didn't know what I was doing, because it's my first divorce and last, hopefully. But I didn't know what I was dealing with, and a lot of times I had a big time lawyer, and he'd say, "Just meet me a half hour before we go into court." And to me, that was a night. This is my life. You want to meet a half hour before you go into court? So I know what you mean by manage, but explain to the viewers what you mean by managing your clients.
Well, of all areas that people are going to experience, all areas of litigation and law, the area of divorce and family law is the most difficult for the client to navigate. They've never been involved in anything like that unless they're on their second or third divorce. And it's not TV. Whatever you see on TV doesn't really happen in the courts, as you know. Right. There's a practical reality to what's going on in the courtroom. And the clients don't understand it, because it's not always about the facts and the law. Right. There are subtleties going on in divorce and in family court that the clients really need help navigating. So we make it a point that all my clients have my cell phone number, because if something happens after hours and they don't contact me, and it does, the situation always arises where somebody's spouse says, "I'm going to call the police on you, and I'm going to tell them, you hit me or you choked me," and the police show up, and if the client can't reach me, he's not going to have any idea what he's going to do, and he's going to do the wrong thing. Right. So if they don't contact me when things are happening, then it's going to be too late, and now it's a digger hole to try and dig them out of. So they have my cell phone. They know they can reach me. They can text me anytime, because as you know, we work late, and it's very important. Now, why do we manage the clients? Because in this age of social media, you have text messages, you have emails, and those things always end up in court. And so a lot of my clients, I say, "Listen, you're not allowed to send out an email."
That was me.
"Unless I see it first, so I can edit it or tell you what you're doing wrong." Because invariably, the things end up as evidence in court, and Facebook is another thing. Everybody, people are saying, "Oh, I have no money, I have no money." Well, you have no money, yet you're posting all these pictures of all these trips you're taking, you're skiing, you're gambling, you're out drinking, you're doing this, and people they can't stop. People are so addicted to Facebook and all these social media avenues that they don't understand that somebody is copying everything on there, printing it out, and it's going to be in court.
And conversely, you could use it, as you've taught me, to your benefit. For example, when you could write something in an email, it's going to end up in court. So you could put the right thing, and sometimes you elicit a response that can help you. I mean, this is serious business, so it needs to be managed. But I know something that you've taught me, and even now that after my case, is that you have to, what you write could be used to help you. Write something that's going to picture it's going to be in court.
Well, you want to keep things in writing, because supposing you have a dispute, and you're trying to be reasonable, the other person's being unreasonable. Well, if you lay it out in writing, you send an email. Emails are better than text messages, because text they typically don't have timestamps on them. Right. So you get a run of text, and you don't know what the time frame is. Whereas an email, it's better to track. You send an email, and you make sure you're talking or you're writing in a reasonable fashion.
Which you don't know sometimes when you're too close to it.
That's right.
Which is why it's good to have a third person.
But then you have something, it's hard to deny an email.
Right.
You know, somebody said, well, they never said that, or they never contacted me and told me that my kid had a game yesterday or a concert that night. You send an email, now it's a record.
Right. So what about people, a lot of times, and I, as president of Americans for Legal Reform, I get a lot of people who come to me and they say, oh, my divorce is a mess and now I'm in court all the time. And I say, well, who was your attorney? And they go, oh, it was a friend of the family's. He did it for a favor and I didn't want to spend, I went to the divorce lawyer. It was $7,500 retainer. And my friend said, this is easy. I'll go to divorce. I'll go to court. And I think you had mentioned that, unlike almost any aspect of law, this is where an attorney's skill is probably more important, because in criminal court, I think they tend to follow the evidence a little bit more, and you have to put it forward, because if you don't, your client goes to jail. Family law, you get a lot of people who maybe aren't as good as an attorney, and they just jump into it because, as you said, they don't follow the law. So pretty much anything goes. The lawyer can, I've seen them there. Some of the lawyers are embarrassing, and I read the agreements. They just don't know what they don't know what's going to happen. So why is it so important to get a good family lawyer right out of the box?
Well, as we talked about early on, it's such a difficult area to navigate because, as we said, it's the courts they have too much going on. There's too many cases, and it's very difficult for the courts to manage that. So what are the courts trying to do? They're trying to move product. They get orders from up above. You got to get these cases moving. You got to get them moving, and so they can't devote the amount of time and attention that I'm sure that these judges would like to. So they can't micromanage you. So you have your story to tell, but they don't have time to hear your story.
Right.
So the lawyer has to present the bullet points in such a way so they're going to resonate with the court. And if you wait too long to do that, well, then your case already has a footprint. Like you go in, somebody says, he's doing this, he's doing that, and the wife plays the victim, or she might be the victim, but now there's a footprint on your case.
Absolutely.
And once there's a footprint on a case, it's very hard to move on from that. So it's very important when you're starting out that you've got a lawyer that knows what's going on there, knows the judge, knows the law secretary, and knows what resonates with the judge and what doesn't. Right. And family court is even worse because they are so overburdened that you got to get your story in and out in a thumbnail,
right,
and get it out, and then you gotta try and do the best you can under those circumstances and help navigate the client through it, because the client is going to go in and it's such a whirlwind, they're not going to know what hit them.
Right.
And then of course they're going to blame us
right,
as a lawyer. But there's certain things that we tell our clients all the time: do this, don't do that. And if they listen to us 50% of the time, we consider ourselves lucky. But the reason for that is, to the client, a lot of this it's not logical, what's
right,
going on there. They don't understand why can't they see their child more often? Why is she getting more say than they are? And it's really a very difficult aspect of this type of practice, that you're a lawyer, you're a psychologist, you're a den mother, you're a teacher, you're a best friend. You have to assume all those roles because the client is really depending on you in these circumstances. Like a patient goes to a doctor, they don't know anything about treating cancer or treating a heart condition or a broken leg. They are really reliant on the doctor to solve their problem right, and get them healthy. Well, it's very similar in this area of law. They know nothing about what's going to happen.
It's also counterintuitive, I think, too, because you're taught, right, everybody says, all the courts care about is the best interest of the child. And when you get in there, that's like the last thing they talk about. They talk about the money, who's going to pay this, how much time you're going to get. Really, the best interest of the child is almost not even, it's almost like a joke. If you say, well, isn't the best interest for us to both have as much time with the child as possible? I think they would laugh at you if you said that. But that's what you read. If you Google New York State rules, who determines custody, who determines the parenting, everything comes up, best interest of the child. when you get into court, that's not really what happens.
Well, as I said, there's a practical reality of what goes on in the courtroom, and that's why the clients are so dependent on how we handle them and the information we give them.
And the educating. You mentioned this in that your last answer about the footprint, how important having a good footprint, or how bad it is to have a bad one. And if you're up against an attorney who knows what they're doing, listen, there's unscrupulous attorneys. I face one, and they tell their client, hey, get an order of protection, get him or her out of the house, and there's the footprint. And what I've learned is you have to hit that really hard at the beginning, because as you said, once it goes on for 2 or 3 years, that becomes reality.
Yeah, you're the guy who had the order of protection against them.
Or 2 of them, or 3 of them, and then violated the order of protection. And the common thing, like the judge doesn't know much time, they say, oh, well, there's smoke, there's fire. Maybe he didn't punch her, but he probably slapped her once or twice. And the footprint is very, very hard to get out from under.
Yes, it is.
So I can't agree more with the importance of that. Now let's talk about something that's very important to me and close to me, as you know, is parental alienation. And I send a lot of people, as you know, that have experienced it, are experiencing alienation, and I send them to you. And I send them for 2 reasons. First of all, you'll give them the truth. And a lot of times, if it's going on for so long, you'll tell them what they may not want to hear. But I've had you tell people, look, there's nothing that's going to do. The courts aren't going to change it. Your kids have gotten older. You sort of just stuck with it and do the best you can. But I've also sent you people at the beginning where you say, hey, we have to hit them hard. And my feeling is, and let me know if you disagree, throw it all out there at the beginning. Spend all your money right at the beginning trying to fix it. Because if a year goes by or 2 years goes by, first of all, the kids are so entrenched that even if you finally get a judge who cares, it's very, very hard. We had just on before you, Dr. Robert Goldman, who testifies in court many times in alienation. And really, the only way to stop it is to remove them from the alienating parent. No contact for a couple months. Very few judges, I don't know any, but I'll say very few, will actually do it. So what do you do when somebody comes to you and says, first of all, at the beginning, and says, hey, my ex is turning my kids against me. I see it coming. They come less. They don't tell me. What do you do at the beginning? And then the second part is, what do you do when they come to you and say, I haven't seen my kids in a year. They're withholding my kids from me. What do I do?
Well, unfortunately, I have too much experience,
I know you do.
And it's very sad. And the reality is very sad because, listen, I've read the books. I've actually cross-examined, the foremost experts on the issue. So I know the issues, I know the elements. But based on my experience, the reality is, if there's real alienation going on, and you don't stop that within a year and a half, now you're talking about diminishing returns, because once the kids are in that environment for that amount of time, and that's not a lot of time, it's very hard to reverse it. I've seen it in very, very rare cases. I've seen it reversed, but then a few years later, boom, it goes back to where it was because something happens, and the kids are so easy to believe the stories they were told. And the problem with alienation is the alienating parent, in the cases that I've seen, the worst cases, they really believe they're not doing it. Mm-hmm. I mean, they are absolutely convinced they're not doing it. Oh, I want the other parent to see the children. But meantime, they are indoctrinating these kids to the point where the kids absorb an alternate reality, where they start believing, even though it didn't happen, that this is what the other parent did to them 5 years ago. Right. Oh, and you hear that, and you keep hearing it, a young mind is going to believe that.
Especially coming from a parent.
Right, so, it's very difficult. And as you said, what's the solution? Well, if you get to see the alienated child, say 50% of the time, what's going on the other 50% of the time? He goes back into that environment of indoctrination.
Right. And families usually get involved too, which makes it worse.
Right, but once you put him back in that environment that he's been in for that year and a half, well, he's gonna be back in his comfort zone, and he's gonna be hearing the same things, and it's not gonna stop. Now, as you said, the courts are very reluctant to do something about it.
Is it because they don't believe it? Because it is counterintuitive that a child would stop talking to a parent who they once loved. I could, before I experienced it, Robert, I wouldn't have believed it. I have a cousin who was alienated, and I said, yeah, he's such a nice guy. Maybe in private he's an asshole, and he does something to the kids, because I can't, why would kids? He's such a loving father. So until I experienced it, honestly, I would think the same thing too. There must be something going on. Do judges feel this, or they just don't care or want to deal with it?
Well, you know, the problem is it is such a complex area. That, you know, if the attorney for the children isn't familiar with it and the court's not familiar with it, now remember, in a lot of the courts in New York State, when you become a judge, when you're first elected and you start to serve, in some place like Nassau County, the first thing you do is, your rite of passage is you do 2 years in matrimonial court. Now, you're coming in green. You know, you're not familiar with, you know, unless you are an experienced matrimonial attorney before you became a judge, you're not really familiar with the subtleties of this. And I don't, you know, how much can you be educated in judge school,
right,
to learn about that? So, you know, it's if you're not familiar with it, it's hard to grasp that one parent is exerting so much influence on another parent, on a child, that the child doesn't want to see the other parent. The path of least resistance is that, well, that parent must have done something to deserve it. And that's a big problem. So when clients come to see me, the best thing I can offer them is to be candid and tell them the truth of their situation. Like if somebody comes in, it's been 2 years, I have to tell them, I said, listen, it's been 2 years. You know, your chances of success are less than 50%. Right. Now, there's typically when somebody comes in and there's been an alienating situation and not really seeing their kids. Well, talk to any expert on alienation. What's the most important thing? Right. Time. Contact. Time with your child,
right. It's harder to do it
the
more time, right?
And if that hasn't been going on, and it, you know, you're not going to improve the situation. And if you do get time, and then the child goes back into that environment, well, it's just not going to be productive to solving that problem.
And unfortunately, I think you'll agree, the sad reality is that you need the money to do it. Because if you really want to get the alienation, you need to bring in forensic psychologists, you need to bring in expert witnesses, and in Suffolk and Nassau, they don't even want to, you bring up the word alienation right off the bat, oh, it's not in the DSM-5, we don't believe, you know, we can't talk about it. So then you have to use different words to get around it. But if you don't have the money to pay for a lawyer, to go in and out of court, to do the forensic exam, which is $10,000 to $15,000, to bring in expert witnesses at $2,500 a day, to pay a lawyer $450 an hour, to sit in the courtroom from 9 in the morning till 4 at night. Unfortunately, money buys you the children. If you don't have it, you
and
can't
even
win.
then, and that's no guarantee.
And that's not a guarantee. Look at Bill O'Reilly. He didn't see. He had dealt with alienation. He's got all the money in the world that couldn't stop it.
Well, what I also advise my clients to do is you need corroborative evidence. In other words, the fact that you say something and she's going to say or he's going to say the opposite, well, now, you know, it's a he said, she said situation. So I tell the client, listen, you got to get the child into a therapist. Now, there's 100,000 therapists out there.
Right.
And the majority of them cannot detect alienation because they're not familiar enough with it. So you got to find the right therapist, and let the therapist decide. You know, if the therapist knows what to look for, and you get a therapist says, you know what, I think that might be alienation. And boom, you bring that into court. Now you got something.
Right.
Now here's the problem in getting to that point. You're not seeing the child, which means the other parent has the most of the time with the parent and is quote unquote raising the child now. Well, you think that parent's going to let you pick the psychologist? Right. Which is where you need the help of the attorney for the child at that point to say, listen, this is somebody that's qualified in the area. I want the child to see that, and hopefully you know it's 2 against 1.
Well, unfortunately, you bring up the attorney for the child. You know, unfortunately, in too many cases, I see what happens. Their role is to do what the children say. So now you have an alienated kid who goes to the attorney for the child and says, "I want to live with my mom," or "I want to live with my dad." Now you got another person who's aligned fighting you too, and that happened in my case, where your job was to try to get the person to say, well, look, yes, this is what they're saying, but you have an obligation to tell the court that you believe that this is not what they feel that they've been coached, or that it's putting them in a harm, which I believe it is mentally putting them, it's child abuse. But that's not an easy task. I mean, you tried in my case, it didn't succeed. But
that's a big misconception that the clients always have trouble handling.
Always.
There's an attorney for the child, and they think that that attorney is a neutral.
Right. We're looking out for the kid's best interest.
Now, that is not, and this came down from the chief judge of the Court of Appeals, several years ago. You are, and what she said to in this area, and the attorney for the children is, you are an attorney for that child, just like that child is your client, just like any other client would be that you were representing. It's not your job to go in and you decide what's in the best interest of that child. That's not your job is to do what the child wants. Now, what's irrational about that is you have a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old.
Even what does a 10-year-old know what's in their best interest?
They're not old enough to vote. They're not old enough to drive. They're not old enough to make any other type of decision on their own. And yet here, what they say to the attorney for the child is that's a directive of that attorney. So they're empowered to direct the attorney for the child what to do. Right. And that's, it's a little absurd.
But that's what we have to deal with.
Yes.
So, people argue about it. Look, there's no use arguing with your attorney about it. They know it's absurd, but it is what it is. And a lot of the laws don't make sense, but you have to deal with what you have. If you don't like it, join Americans for Legal Reform and try to fight it, but you have to deal with what's before you.
Well, now we're back to where we started, navigation.
Right.
Navigating, these treacherous waters, and they are treacherous,
right.
And there's a lot to lose.
Yeah, I mean, this is your life, and if there's any time to hire a good lawyer, this is the time to do it. And we only have 2 minutes left, but I want to explain what I said at the beginning when I said Robert is your best second lawyer. And that's basically for that reason. A lot of times people will hire an attorney and they think magic is going to happen. They say, because everybody in their own mind thinks they're the best parent. Or they think at the very least, I'm going to get shared parenting. It's easy. I'm willing to be home. They think it's going to be easy. So they go to the attorney and he can't or she can't get them what they want, which is maybe what they should get, shared parenting. And people get so frustrated with their first attorney usually because they can't get, they may be good or bad. They can't, it doesn't go the way they thought. I think it was, maybe it was Alec Baldwin who said, if you want justice, stay out of the courts.
I tell my clients that all the time because, listen, it's almost that way in all areas of law because the courts are not going to micromanage your life and they're not going to see things the way you do typically.
Can you settle cases? I know a lot of times people hire lawyers, and the lawyer, it's not great because if the lawyer settles the case, he doesn't make a lot of money, right? Because he only gets the retainer and he's done. But if he litigates it and it goes on for years, he can make a lot of money. So we only have less than a minute left. So I know that's a tough question, but can you keep these cases out of court, and do you recommend doing it if possible?
I've seen very few clients who had any success with mediation. I think you need a lawyer to start with. Now, once you have a lawyer, I've offered, to go to mediation with clients, or just to mediate it ourselves.
Right. I know you've done that for
lawyer to lawyer.
Right.
But again, it takes 4 to tango. Right. The parties and each of their lawyers. If one of those people, including one lawyer, doesn't want to settle, its case is not.
And unfortunately, that happens too often. So if you see a lawyer with a fancy office and a whole staff full of people, where does that money come from? It didn't come from settling cases on the first meeting. So Robert Hiltzik, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to come in and everything you do to fight for people in this difficult thing. Robert Hiltzik his office is in Jericho. You can find him online. You can send a message through Facebook to us, and we'll get you to Robert Hiltzik. I'm Gary Jacobs, and thank you for joining us on Long Island Backstory.
Long Island Backstory is made possible in part by Americans for Legal Reform, the oldest, most successful legal group in the world. P.O. Box 2679, Huntington Station, New York 11746. Telephone 631-421-6390. Website Americans, the number 4, legalreform.com.